whenever you're ready.
Sure. Thank you, Mary. We'll have some ding dongs. That's okay. Hey, so as we're putting this stuff together, student engagement was something that so many faculty responded to our survey with. So just wanting to have a conversation about that and to understand maybe as we shift our locus and perhaps find new ways to have this action of communication, really how to engage students. We all know how to read the room when we're in the room as professional educators. We know how to feel the energy level and see what's going on and when to go forward and when to maybe slow down a little bit. And we've all learned techniques in a certain locus of the physical classroom, but that's disrupted now. And as we go forward, the conversation we wanted to have today, hopefully, was just one to think about student engagement through a more mediated discourse, through this asynchronous and synchronous learning with digital stuff. And so I'm really happy to just have an hour that we can all get together and maybe talk about some things. I asked two professors, Professor Redlick and Dean Smith, to come and talk from maybe two different perspectives or maybe complementary perspectives. And one of the things I was thinking about as we go forward is the notion sometimes of students who may have some special needs or may have some special circumstances. I was just asked yesterday to be on a committee with the Office for Students with Learning Disabilities, or I don't like that word really, but with challenges, right? And we all know what to do when we get those letters. You get the letter that says give them time and a half and give them note taker and do those things. We know how to accommodate and keep those students engaged. But what I immediately started thinking about is, what does this do to that old formula, right? To what we knew, it was familiar to do the things that we get on that letter, but maybe we're going to need to rethink that letter a bit. And one of the reasons I'm really glad to have Dean Smith here was to think about perhaps some special circumstances that might apply to students from different cultures, different socioeconomic groups. One thing that came up to me was the notion of whether people come on live or stay behind a picture or their name in a Zoom room. For some person, that might seem as a way to stay removed or not want to engage or only be halfway interested in the course. Perhaps there's a student who's not comfortable with a camera, with all of their peers seeing what their home looks like, And how do we understand that, and how do we help that student not fall through the cracks, and how do we think and maybe take some of those things into circumstance? So there's a huge conversation to have. And so anyway, I hope we can. I have a couple of things I wanted to ask our panelists, but I hope everybody can just chime in, and if you've got a question, put it in the chat. We can come forward with that and have a good hour discussion. And so I just thought maybe I'd start, maybe Professor Redlick, with you, with just maybe what have you found to be effective in maintaining student engagement, both synchronously and asynchronously, and challenges and tips. It's yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, it's good to see everyone here, pictures or cameras. You must call me Maddie, because I think most of you on here know me well enough that you can just call me that instead. But I appreciate the formality, so thank you. I am happy to talk a little bit about student engagement. I actually had occasion to just be on the phone with Yaki last night, and I kind of described my position on this as having a couple of parlor tricks that I think can really engage your students. So I don't think what I'm going to offer are like really broad, overarching pedagogical insights, but just things that I do that over the course of a couple of semesters have been effective. And some of them are rooted and backed by educational research, and some of them are not. And that's just kind of how I roll. So hopefully some learned wisdom, lived experience, and some research-based stuff. So one of the things that I think is really useful is differentiating telling students what you know versus what you think. So we're all pretty good at telling students what we know, right? We all have a content area expertise. We all have formulas, equations, models, artifacts, etc., right? We have the outline of what we're going to tell our students. But when you want to create connection with your students, either synchronously or asynchronously, you want to kind of let them into what you think about that material. So not just, I know this thing, but I think this is useful. I think this is funny. I struggled learning this. One way that I remember this is. So give students some sort of insight into your personal opinion on the material. I'm not telling you need to tell them your politics or anything like that, but let them know a little bit more about how you personally engage with it, and that will make them feel maybe a little bit more comfortable engaging with it as well. Somewhat related to that is there is a desire to create somewhat of a social presence with your students. And to do that, this is one of my research-backed things, you can engage in really intentional self-disclosure. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean telling your students that you're having a horrible day and you're on like the low part of your Corona coaster and that, you know, you're all of these things, right? What it means is just tell them something about you that they can maybe connect with. So I do this in a really structured way. I do this thing called the check-in. And at the beginning of every synchronous class session that I hold, I put a question up on screen, usually with a ridiculous meme, because I like to doom scroll the internet in the morning and I want to share these things with people. And then my class is my captive audience. I put a meme up there that's kind of related to the question. And the question is something that is like basic or personal, right? So it might be something like, one that I use very often is, what's your favorite after school snack? What word can you never spell correctly? What's your guilty pleasure TV show that you don't even want your roommate to know that you're watching, right? And then I have the students put that into the chat, and I kind of watch the chat as it live scrolls and comment on it and say, oh my gosh, I also watch Dance Moms, or yes, I too routinely eat a fistful of cheese when I finish teaching, right? It's all of these things that just create a sense of like, hey, I'm a person and you're a person, and we have these shared experiences. Note of caution with that is that you want to do things that are really inclusive. So one time I asked my class, what's your best Halloween costume? Not recognizing that some of my students in that class were of a faith that doesn't celebrate Halloween. So that was a super embarrassing moment for me. So I went home and cried after that, but don't cry during it. Another thing about self-disclosure is we know that you want to keep it relatively positive. So it shouldn't be a complaining session. So those are two kind of tips and tricks. And when I read the questions that came in a lot before this, a lot of people were wondering how you can get students to engage with asynchronous discussion. And my best tip for that is to be extremely, extremely specific about what you want their discussion posts to look like. So don't just say, discuss, or tell me what you think. Give them prompts like, I agree with this because, or I disagree with this because. If you want them to respond to another student, make that known. Say, I want things that are clear, that are precise. Develop a guide, or I'm happy to share any of the guides that I have developed for what good discussion posts look like. But you need to be much more structured with your students. And I guess maybe I already said my final thing. My final thing, which I've heard really good feedback from my students about, is the importance of a weekly checklist. So one of the ways that we used to keep our students on track or engaged was to force them to come into the classroom and look them in the eye, and they would say to you, I'm sorry, I don't have this thing for you. Shame, shame, shame. Don't do that. That's not a good teaching technique. But something that we don't get now that we don't get to bring students in or maybe even look them in the eye is that method of keeping them on track. So what I do for every week that I have a class is on Monday of that class week, even if we don't meet, at the same time, I set a Canvas announcement to release that has every single thing that the student needs to do that week, with a time, a date, what the action is, where they can find it, and this is the most important piece for asynchronous learning, an estimated time to complete. That way your students can start to schedule around their job, their home care responsibilities. They can say, okay, I know I have 35 minutes in between these two things, so I can probably do this 15-minute video module in that time. And they can also, if you are like me and are super type A, put a little place where they can mark that it's done. And then that gives them a sense of mastery as they're moving through stuff. I release that every week at the same time on Canvas through an announcement. I post it in my modules, and sometimes I even email it to the students, because different students respond to different communication mediums. But if you have something that's important, you should communicate it at least twice, and hopefully using 2 different communication channels. So video and text, text and whatever, all of these things. It's just important to over communicate and over specify what you want their communication to look like. That was a lot of talking. So I'm going to shut up now.
That's great. Thank you so much. Dean Smith, you want to follow up on anything that she had to say, or any things that struck you as she was talking, and then maybe we can talk about some more with you.
Well, Maddie, first of all, that was excellent. I actually wrote down a bunch of notes. So I'll just say ditto to everything. I think the one thing that just stuck out to me, and it's something that I think as a teacher I've always lived by, and that's transparency. Because I think students oftentimes think that we are these sort of all-knowing, all-wise sages, and we're not accessible to them, and we don't understand what they're going through. And I know I found that once we moved online, that there were just certain circumstances that students were going through. And it wasn't until I let them know that, I also was a college student, and, I also experienced some of these things that you're experiencing right now. It was when I was able to do that they opened up to me, and I was able to reach them in a way that I was not able to reach them before that, And I also think, students really want understanding. I mean, I think what happened, I know even in my class it happened, and I sort of had to go the BCal route. Some students kind of disappeared on me. And one of the things that I realized is that, one, I needed to, follow up and figure out what was going on with them. And I also needed to keep following up, right? So every week, because it was like 3 or 4 weeks, one student disappeared for almost a month, and I didn't know what was going on. I had talked to BCal, I had done all of these things, and finally I was able to get an answer. But it was only after I actually kept emailing, got the phone number, tried to call, and I just kept in constant contact with the student, and then found out, we're having internet access issues. My mom is also working here, so I can't be on the internet at the same time as her. So I can't really access anything into the middle of the night. So that's why I haven't, right? There's all of these different circumstances that came up. And it wasn't until I reached out, and the student actually never reached out to me and said any of this until I reached out to them. Because another thing I found out after speaking to them is there's a level of shame that comes with this idea of not having access to the things that they feel like they have to have access to. And so they don't feel like they can come to us. And sadly, a lot of them would just rather like fail the class than actually come to us and say, hey, can I please get an extension? Hey, is there a way that we can maybe get on the phone and talk over the assignment instead? And so, yeah, just I think transparency, and also just making sure that we are reaching out to the students and that we let them know that we understand what they're going through, and that we don't make them feel bad about going through these sort of circumstances that they're going through right now. And also, I think there was this meme going around saying you're not at home. What is it? You're not at home working during a pandemic. You're in a pandemic trying to work. I forget exactly what it was. And I think that's also something that we need to remember, is that it's not just that students moved online and they're at home under the same circumstances that they were in when they were actually in our classrooms in Austin. Some of them are going home to abusive relationships with their parents. Some of them are going home, to situations where they have to actually become caretakers. Some of them have become literally full-time workers because their parents lost their jobs. And so I think we have to understand that the way that we teach them even has to shift and change. And I know it does require more work from us, but ultimately, as I always tell the students, we're here for you. We're here to make sure that you're successful. And so I'm going to do everything in my power, even if it means that I have to move some things around and maybe slightly inconvenience myself. And I do it like that because I don't find it to be an inconvenience at all. But I'll just slightly do that if I have to, in order to make sure that you're actually being successful and actually able to continue to engage with the work that I'm trying to get you to engage with.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Do we have anything in the anything in the chat room? Any questions so far that we want to come up with? Moderator Ivy.
Hello. There's just some good comments from Dr. McElroy and Heather Halstead. I'm sorry, I don't know you, Heather. I'm a grad student in journalism. But yeah, the idea of just thinking the best of students as opposed to thinking that they're trying to get away with something, because everyone's going through it all right now. And it's hard to be in the middle of a pandemic and still trying to learn. So, but yeah, if anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in to the chat and we'll get them to Joe.
So one teaching tip that I might give on the idea of asking about and making space for students who have some sort of circumstance going on at home that they wouldn't be dealing with at school that prevents some sort of access for them, without asking them to disclose exactly what that is to you, because you should not do that. They may not be comfortable, and that might put you in a situation where there's a bunch of different stuff going on. So at the beginning of every class that I teach, I release a names and pronouns survey. So many of our students go by names that are not the names that the registrar has for them. So I ask them what their name is and what they'd like to be called and what their pronouns are. But I've also added another piece of information starting this summer. I taught summer 1, which is, do you anticipate having any challenges to accessing technology over the course of the semester? And I just put a yes, no radio button. There's no need to figure out like what it is that's going on or anything that's going to be preventing them from learning. It's just so I know ahead of time that maybe I want to have that name in the back of my head as I'm going through the first assignment that's due. And I'm saying, okay, well, these 5 people have not turned in the assignment. I'm going to reach out to all 5 of them. And I might say, I noticed that you indicated that you have some obstacles to accessing technology. Is there anything I can help you with? So you can gather some information at the beginning of your course without infringing on their privacy, that helps you to just be on the lookout for the red flags that you might get in the room, like a student who looks really distressed, or a student who's constantly coming in late, or a student who, any sorts of those markers that we can kind of pick up on without delving into someone's business, because you don't have to do that. You can set yourself up for success and set that student up for success as well.
Right, that's great. All right, so I'm a little trepidatious about raising this, but I don't have a hard heart, but I do want to raise something that I want to just see what people think about this, which is, with all of this going on, and with us all wanting them to succeed, because we do or we wouldn't be doing this, how do we account for rigor? Where is it that we don't give away the store, or where do we find that place to say we're a tier 1 research university, and where do we find, how do we negotiate that? Because I think people are lost in that. I think there are some professors who really are trying to figure that out. How do we maintain the standards of a tier 1 research university, be compassionate, be their teacher, not their drill sergeant, but their teacher, but also be fair to people who are also making choices and doing this stuff. And I don't have an answer to that, but I would just like to see if anybody else has thought that, or has wondered that, or has found themselves lost in their own conversation around that.
It's interesting because I know with me, because I'm teaching production classes, it became a huge challenge, because how do you teach a production class when people cannot actually produce work, right? And so you have to find these sort of alternative ways of not only teaching the class, but you also have to just find alternative ways of keeping the students engaged, because ultimately the way they were engaged, right, they were on set with each other, and they were helping each other, shoot their films, and they were in class with actors and things like that. And all of that, especially for the second half of the spring, it all went away. Yeah. And so what I did to keep them engaged, and also to make sure that I was keeping them sort of going on with the rigor of the class, is, one, I took everything that we were supposed to do in terms of production, and I turned it into more of a pre-production class. So, when they were supposed to be bringing in actors, so instead of doing that, they're writing extended bios of these actors. Instead of that, they're actually doing all of their pre-production paperwork, right? And this is stuff that I would sometimes get a little lax about when they were bringing in actors, because I understood how much work it was to talk to agents, to audition, to find time to rehearse with actors, to bring them in. And since we weren't doing that, I said, okay, let me then go to the other side and make sure that they're literally building in I think at one point I had a 30-page document that a student turned into me that went through every, backstory and shot lists and storyboards and all these other things, so that I could continue to keep them engaged. Another thing that I did, we kind of pivoted a little bit more to the film kind of study side, and very little by just having these Netflix watch parties where we would watch films and we would actually engage in conversation about, again, composition, about story arc, about character arc, about all of those things, literally right in the chat as the movie was going on. I would ask questions and they would answer those questions, and then they would ask me questions. And then we would sort of take scenes and dissect those scenes in a chat. And that actually not only helped keep them engaged, but it also is working another part of their brain, because that's not what my class is about at all, where we're mostly about working with actors. So I just found alternative ways to keep them, again, not only engaged, but also to keep that rigor that I was looking for, or that I'm always looking for when we're actually physically in a space together.
Right. Maddie, you lit up when I used that word rigor. What do you think?
Well, so I want to jump off Yaki's point. I think that this idea of rigor and engagement, these two things are completely bound up with each other, because if you are continuously engaged with a student, you as a human person should be able to judge whether you are, I think, as you said, giving away the store to a student over time, right? Over a continued series of conversations, and here's what I expect of you and here's what you're giving back. So you're going to find this balance of rigor and flexibility over the course of developing a relationship with that student. And you may have to do a little bit of extra work to say, can you explain to me what you mean by, or can you tell me a little bit more about what's going on? And again, not prying, but just trying to get a better sense of where they're at and what's standing in their way. And perhaps related to that, one of the things that I have found helpful in maintaining student engagement is a sense of repeated structure. So it can get a little bit boring maybe for me, but I start every class that I have in the exact same way. I use the exact same PowerPoint template, use the same fonts, I use the same blah, 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 whatever. And student feedback from the past 2 semesters, I think really speaks to my personality. They said it was annoying at first, but then I came to like it, right? And so students, one of the things that they're saying is, I really miss the routine of coming to class. I really miss the routine of taking notes, getting a snack, going to my next class. So if you start building a sense of you can build a sense of your class having a place, right? They know that when I'm engaging with my laptop and my computer with Dr. Redlick's course, it feels like this, and it feels like being in this space. So you start to recreate a sense of attachment to, it's kind of like conditioning them. Which is a weird way to talk about your students, but it's giving them a sense of structure that they're coming to, that we lose when we made this transition to online by nature of no longer having a physical meeting space.
Hey, how do you guys feel about differences in smaller classes, the classes that are 25 and 30 versus the classes that are, 150 and 200? And, there seems to be, at least in some conversations, the idea that, well, if we're online, enrollment doesn't matter. If he's teaching a digital class, it used to be 45, it can just as easily be 145. And that's not really true. So I'm just curious about how you guys negotiate maybe some of these differences, or if you've found any differences in your traditional small, more seminar style classes, or even if you've got a production class, you've got to be so hands-on with them that 150 is just crazy. What about engagement and class size?
I mean, luckily I don't teach the big seminar classes, and I'm glad that I don't. There's a lot of students. But I'll have to say this, even with 18 students, it became, I think, probably quadruple the amount of work to keep them engaged when we moved online. So I don't know how one would keep 150 students engaged online. I mean, I would love for somebody on here who does that to tell me the tips, because I have to say with the 18, it was a bunch of calling, a bunch of emails, a lot of one-on-ones because people didn't quite understand the assignment. So I literally had to get on Zoom and share my screen one-on-one with each student at times to show them what I was asking them to do. When in fact, if I was in a lecture hall, I literally could do it once and everybody was engaged with that. So it became really, 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 really difficult. But again, I think the one thing that helped me, again, with just the 18, again, I don't know about the 150, was again, just keeping up with them throughout the course of the semester and constantly checking in. Even if we didn't have a class one week, didn't matter to me. I was going to check in with everyone. Are you finishing your assignment? Do you need help? I have office hours. Let's get on Zoom. Email me your assignment. Let me walk through it with you, whatever it may be. That way they knew not only that I was with them the whole way, but again, that it kept them engaged, so that then if we didn't meet a week, they didn't just get lax about the assignments or lax about the class. Because that's what I found happen at times where students would disappear. if I would find them 3 or 4 weeks later, no matter what the issue was, I always felt like they were not as engaged. And so I had to find a way to get them re-engaged with the classrooms, which is why I decided to do these Netflix parties, because I felt like, again, the minute that they lose not only that engagement, but they lose that community with those other 18 students, I actually started to lose them as a professor.
So one thing that I completely agree with Yaki about is when we first flipped online, I felt so overwhelmed by the amount of time that I was spending on emails, trying to track down students, making sure we didn't lose any of them, et cetera, and realized fairly quickly that's unsustainable, as I think a lot of us know. You hit burnout, et cetera. One thing that I have found useful for my students is setting up a really clear communication policy. And that means exactly when you should know that you'll hear back from me. So I run myself on what I call post office rules for them. If you can't go to the post office, you can't reach me. So if it is a federally recognized holiday, I'm not responding to emails. If it is before 9 a.m., I'm not responding to emails. If it's after 5 p.m., I might respond to emails, but I don't promise you to. But what I do promise is that within one business day, if you send me an email, I will send one back to you. So if you're a student who does this thing where you email at like 11 p.m. at night when there's an assignment due at 8 a.m. the next day, you know from day one, that I do not promise to get back to you in time for that. So that helps them to do a little bit of planning ahead of time, because I come off a little scary on the first day. I'm like, I'm not going to email you back. Sometimes I do. I'm up at weird hours. But it also allows you to have your weekends to do the stuff that you need to do, like grade those little assignments and know that, okay, this student emailed me Friday at 4 p.m. I just need to get back to them by end of day Monday. But I can preserve this off time to do the other stuff that I literally need to do to keep the class running. And that also reduces your students' uncertainty. So some of the stuff that causes students, like for me, the issue with my learners is, I'm teaching mostly in the School of Engineering. The issue with my learners is not that they disappear on me, it's that they'll email me 600 times in a panic. And neither one is better or worse. But when they have less uncertainty about what do I need to do, when can I expect to hear back from you, what channels can I reach you on, that helps them to feel more calm and to do things like batch their emails to you. So rather than asking you 17 questions and 17 emails, to get with their group, put all of them together in one and make an appointment during office hours with you. And that just helps protect your time a little bit in this, because as much as this panel should be student focused and what can we do for them and how do we support them, if you burn yourself out running yourself down, you're not going to be able to be there for them. So we have to come up with ways to protect our time while still being available to them.
I think I just want to say yes to all of that, because ultimately what happens, and I know this happens to me and I'm still trying to figure out the balance. When you're working from home, for some reason, you don't have hours. You're not working the regular 9 to 5. I literally work around the clock because the laptop is here, the phone is next to me, and I'm having a really difficult time, honestly, trying to strike that balance of, no, you need to be off at this time or you need to take time off. And so I completely agree with you, Maddie. It's like we all have to figure out that balance and set up those boundaries early on, because if not, students will call you. I mean, I've had students text me pretty late in the night. Hey, I know this thing is due tomorrow morning, but I don't know how to do the storyboard. Or can you send me the link to that? And I'm like, hey, I put it on Canvas a month ago, right? But again, this happens. But for me, I have to say, Maddie, I love that advice, because I don't think I set those boundaries up from the beginning. I actually think I go the other route, which is bad. I say I'm always available to you. And they actually take that to heart. And at midnight, they're emailing me, expecting for me to email them back with an assignment that's due the next day. And so I think that's so great to just set up those boundaries from the beginning, because it's so important.
Yeah, and it's helpful because I say to them, I don't respond to emails. I don't promise you that I'm going to respond to an email before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. I routinely do. I'm not good at setting boundaries. I have no work-life balance. Raise your hand if you do and let me know how you figured it out. But it sets the expectation so that in case you do decide to take a day where you only work 8 hours, they're not like, oh, you never got back to me in your evals or something like that. But it also creates accountability. And so I also ask for that from them. So I say the deal is if I'm on a 1 business day response, you're also on a 1 business day response. So that way you don't say, well, do you want to meet at this time? You say this to them on Monday, do you want to meet on Thursday? And then Thursday morning, they're like, yeah, I do. So you've been holding that time in your calendar for the entire week. You're like, no, I need to know by Tuesday because I need to schedule my curbside like 5 days in advance at this point. So it gives you the ability to continue running your life through the stressful conditions that we all are learning how to navigate.
One of the double-edged sword aspects of this asynchronous thing is students sign up for it and they have very different schedules. They, like you guys have already said, some of them work 8 to 5 and want to do this at night. Some of them work at night and they're sleepy in the mornings. They want to do it in the afternoon. And so one of the benefits of it is that it's open. It does allow us to bring more students to the class. One of the challenges for that, particularly if you don't have a locked-in time, is how do you create collaboration? How do you create the environment where there is a community, there's an engagement with each other, and someone isn't, and again, sometimes it's not avoidable. Okay, as you mentioned earlier, sometimes they're caregiving their younger brothers and sisters. There's all kinds of circumstances. But if there's an event that you wanted to do your class, if you have a production, you're having them work in a team for a case study, how do you, in an asynchronous particularly, when you don't have a time that they all have to show up at 9:30, how do you get them together and get them to buy into the fact that that part of the class is finding that time to engage their other students and not just, I'm going to do my thing, I'm going to answer this multiple choice test, I don't have to talk to anybody else, I'm a self-paced, and create that sense of community with them?
I mean, that's a really tough question. It's one that I would definitely take feedback from the group on. So I ran a mostly asynchronous class in summer 1, and they do a group project. So I think if you have a course that the structure of my course is they learn teamwork skills eventually leading up to a team project that is at the end of the semester. I would say the earlier you can get them into their project groups, the better. And then also, let's not be so reliant on we all have to meet synchronously together, right? It may be creating more flexibility in your assignments or your expectations for them to say, okay, you are in a small discussion group and I expect you all to contribute this many times per week, but not you have to contribute at this date and time. Or perhaps it's a ratio. You should comment on 2 out of 3, that would be a huge number, 2 out of every 3 posts that are in your small discussion group. The other thing I would encourage for a sense of engagement is think about asking your students to contribute to discussion in ways that are not simply text. So maybe you want them to record videos, maybe you want them to record audio. If you're like me, maybe they're having a meme discussion, make your own meme and share it with the group. There's tons of meme generators out there. For film people, maybe it's make a short clip. Any of these things, post an article that you like, but think about ways to allow students to know each other's minds without having to read a text post.
Great. Okay.
I don't have much to add on it. I mean, I think I agree with all of that. I think it's interesting. One of the things that I did, and this is not me as a professor, this is me as an artist. I was trying to figure out how do I stay creative, right, in this socially distanced world that we find ourselves in. Obviously, with filmmaking, you need a crew, you need actors. And so one of the things that I did is I created a manifesto of sorts. And this manifesto basically lays out rules and regulations for shooting using social distance, where I am literally sitting in this room or in my garage directing actors via Zoom. And I'm only bringing people together who have either been sheltering in place or who have already been in close contact with each other. And what I found with that, and obviously it's not in a classroom setting, but what I found with that is it actually created a huge sense of community amongst these artists that got together because they were trying to figure out, how do we stay creative? How do we keep making films? And so here I am saying, all right, you 3 are roommates, or you 2 live next door to each other and you've been coming over each other's house anyway. So we're going to create a film centered on you 4 or you 3. right? We're going to have our rehearsal via Zoom. You're actually going to shoot each other. So I can't send in a camera person. So I'm actually having the actors film one another like a Dogma style project. And then I'm literally, again, like I say, directing them via Zoom. And I go through all of that to say that I think that's another thing that we have to think about is how do we take what we have normally been doing in the classroom setting, and especially in terms of filming, and how do we change that for the environment that we find ourselves in? Because I think us thinking outside of the box makes our students think outside of the box, and thus it creates a sense of community. Because ultimately what you can do, and I see somebody saying this in the chat, is create small groups. And again, if everybody can't meet at that 9:30 a.m. time, it's fine. That small group can get together and they can figure out when can we meet, when can we shoot, when can we get together to do whatever it is that we're going to do. That way you don't have to worry about trying to keep, 30 people engaged. You have those 5 people, and even just a small group of students together, constantly engaging with each other, that will make them feel like they have a sense of community, even if they're not engaged with the full, 20 students in their class, in their cohort.
You can also do a little bit more information gathering. So if you know you're going to have students work in groups, and I wish I had done this summer. A lot of my students work internships during the day, and then the proportion that didn't are working service industry jobs. I would have asked them to say, I'm mostly going to have time at night, or I'm mostly going to have time in the morning, or I'm mostly going to have time in the middle of the day. And then you can intentionally create groups around their general availability. Also, I know I have a lot of adult learners in my class, so many of them have families. So maybe balancing groups where they could have groups that are structured more around family hours and childcare needs, that might have been helpful to them.
Great. Ivy, is there anything in the room we can talk? Anybody have any questions on the chat?
Let's see. We talked a lot about the small groups and breaking that down. And then we had a question. Dr. Johnson was wondering just about attendance policies. Like, is that something that's easier to do? Is it something that should be done? So, any thoughts on that?
How do you guys handle attendance or lack of? Katie, you said about chasing them down. What is our responsibility to chase them down? What really is our responsibility to chase them down?
I'm going to say this. I think everybody is different, right? But I just think that, especially since we had to pivot so quickly, I feel like it was my responsibility to chase them down. Now, I think it's going to be a little different in the fall and the spring because the students know what they're getting themselves into already, right? So they can kind of set up a schedule sort of based around your class. Now, obviously, there will still be some challenges, but I think you're going to have less of those people who literally pivoted online, don't have access to internet. They didn't know what they were getting themselves into. They don't really understand how to use Zoom, that there's all of those challenges. And I think students hopefully have gotten, a handle on some of those things, just like we're still getting a handle on it. So I think all of us have gone through a learning curve. So hopefully in the fall and the spring, it'll be different. But what I did, I have to say, which made it a little bit easy, I already could tell which students were engaged because we had the first 6 weeks or 8 weeks, on campus. So when those students were not engaged, I took it at, okay, they're doing the same thing that they always did in my class. They weren't showing up on time anyway. They didn't show up for lectures. They didn't turn their things on time. So those students, I did email them. I did call them. But I have to say, it was the students who I knew were fully engaged, who were always in class, who were always turning their stuff in on time. Those were the students that I actually would call over and over and over again or email over and over again, because for me, I felt like, okay, there's some barrier here. There's something wrong. Whereas some of the other ones, after I talked to them a few times and they said to me, oh, I overslept or something like that, I took that as, well, you're kind of doing the same thing that you did when we were together in class. And so, in terms of attendance, I have to say I was really loose. But I did expect for my students to turn their in, right? I had lots of flexibility with that, right, in terms of when you turn it in, but I didn't expect everybody to be, if people missed the Netflix party, I didn't necessarily ding them for that. If they didn't come to a lecture, I didn't ding them for that because I could record it and send it to them. I was more concerned with them actually turning in the assignment and being engaged with me, even if it was one-on-one.
So I hope you all will forgive me for cursing in front of polite company, but I say this in front of my students. I have a very clear attendance policy. It's a 2x2, 2 freebies, and then 2% to your final grade for every unexcused absence after that. But coupled with that, I also run what is called no shit policy. So the very moment that you oversleep and it's your 3rd time and you promised yourself you would never oversleep and oh my gosh, how did I do that? Or the very moment that you are looking at your calendar and my detailed checklist for the week and you realize, oh shit, there's no way I'm going to get this done, or I missed class. Email me right then and there. Email me right then and there and say, I'm in a total panic. My dog grew a 3rd ear and I'm at the vet right now and I can't be at class. And kind of based on, again, my engagement with you from the beginning of the semester, I'm more than willing to be accommodative of you if you let me know that there's a problem. If you say to me, this is completely unlike me, I normally don't do this, or I'm really working on this and this is completely like me, but I'm trying not to miss class so often. As soon as you find yourself in a situation where you say to yourself, oh shit, write me an email and we'll start to work on it together. And that also sets it up for, so if a student says, oh, I missed class, I overslept and I never do that. Well, the 3rd time that they do that, you can say, well, it feels like you might kind of always do that. And so now I am going to be implementing the 2% penalty. So just keeping open the lines of communication, like you should have clear policies, and those policies should have enforcement and consequences, and students should know them. But there should also be flexibility based on the student's buy-in as well. So if a student doesn't give a hoot about your class and could care less whether they're getting a C or not, don't spend your time chasing them down, begging them to turn in work, et cetera, et cetera. Give them the opportunity to talk to you if they want to. And if they don't, that's kind of on them.
All right. Let me, as we're kind of wrapping down here, trying to land the plane, I wanted to just ask if you guys have any thoughts now, and it came up briefly earlier. We all had a certain experience in the spring. And in the spring, it was, let's just land the plane, right? We just needed to land the plane. But we're going into at least a fall, and it wouldn't be unprudent to believe that it's not a whole academic year that's going to be affected by all of this in one way or another. And I just was curious, as we're going into the 2020-21 year, if there's anything that that y'all might already be flagging or have on your radar about what bumps might be in the road in terms of, maybe it's the short semester with Thanksgiving, or maybe it's, you know, how do we prepare for what courses we're offering in the spring, and how do you know? I mean, I'll tell you, I defaulted to asynchronous web-based very fast, and there's a course I made a mistake, and it's already locked in, and I really need, I think I'm going to need to figure out something to change that. I can just see that I went too fast to completely web-based. So and we have to make those decisions way ahead, right? We have to let people know in time for them to register in the fall for courses in the spring, whether it's going to be web-based or whatever. What do you guys see, and how are y'all planning for the 2021 year? And is there anything that you see that you might say, hey, I thought about this, y'all might think about it too?
It's a large and looming question. So this may not speak exactly to the question that you asked, but I think it's all of us need to do thinking about our own individual courses and our own individual strengths as instructors. And so the question that I kind of found myself asking myself in preparing for this was, with so many people asking, how are you keeping students engaged? How do you know students are engaged? Well, my question back into the void is, well, how did you know in the first place? What metrics were you using in the first place? What tools were you using in the first place? What were you looking for in the first place? Is that completely gone now that it's online, or what is a stand-in? What are things that you could look for in other ways that would still be markers of that same phenomenon of engagement? And the other thing that I would suggest to a lot of people who feel really nervous and rightly so about moving online, because they're kind of saying, I'm missing that, that magic of the classroom, or that, that feeling of co-presence. Is what was it that you did in the classroom that you feel you cannot do online, and what is the obstacle, right? What is the specific thing? Name it, and that will allow you to start working around it, rather than saying being online stops me, right? That's not necessarily it. What is it about being online? And so it's a moment of introspection about, what are your strengths as an instructor? What are your students, like, what are they actually deriving value from? Reflect on that, and then build around your strengths.
Good.
Yeah, I'm not teaching next year, so this is I don't have to worry about this that much. But I will say, I'm thinking about what I said earlier about the manifesto I created. I do think that and I'm now specifically talking about filmmakers, what we have to do is we have to really start to think about, in terms of storytelling, how can we keep storytelling going in this remote world, right? And I immediately think of this. I used to direct a TV show in Dallas, and it was the first time that I'd ever done virtual auditions. I had never done that before, because they were like, we're going to do auditions. What time do you need me there? Oh, no, we don't need you here at all. This is how we're going to do it. They're going to send in their tapes. We're going to create a Google Drive. We're going to put all of their tapes here. We're going to have a checklist for you. You're going to make comments on each of their videos. We're going to send those comments. They're going to actually re-record themselves, send it in again, and then you're going to choose that way. So I'm literally casting a whole TV show without ever meeting a person at all. The first time I met them was when we stepped on set. So in terms of auditioning, that's another way. That's one way we have to think about this. Also, this whole notion of this remote directing. Netflix is doing something like this right now. Genji Cohen has created a new show where literally she's going to have people record themselves. She's going to send in very small crews into people's homes, and they're going to shoot the content, right? So that's another way for us to think about keeping our students actually out making films during this pandemic. And what I'm going with, where I'm going with this is, I just think we can't try to take what we've done in a physical space and just fold it into an online space, because it's not always going to work the same way. And so I think what we have to do, and it does require a lot more work, but we have to think outside of the box in terms of, what does the future really look like for filmmaking? Because this actually can change everything. The size of crews is going to change. The way that we have to sanitize, that's going to change. But I also think of this. There's been a push for green sets for a very long time. Right, everybody bring their own water bottle. We don't have paper scripts. We don't have paper call sheets. Everything is on your phone. That's something that's been implemented for a while, but we all haven't done it. So now maybe this is a time for us to move in that direction. So I just think now it's just a time to think outside of the box and shift not only our pedagogy, but also just shift the ways in which we think in our own research, because ultimately if we do that, then we'll bring those skills into the classroom and help our students.
Yeah, I agree with Yaki. I also think, to borrow some terminology from Mary, this is a really great time for people who are not comfortable with backwards design to get comfortable with it. So the purpose of your class is to have some learning outcomes, right? Some objectives. All right, well, there's, to use a weird phrase that is in my head, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So, stick to your learning objectives. That's what your course is there to do, but find another way to get there. And kind of the other metaphor that's lurking around my brain right now is like, this is the higher education version of Chopped. You have what's in your house, and you can't leave your house to get other stuff. You got to make something out of it. And it can't be French toast, and you can't call it Pan Purdue, okay? So you have what's in front of you, and now we have a little time to do a little thinking. Now you can think about making something good out of the resources that you have now, rather than pining for the resources that you used to have.
That's great. Hey, well, let's wrap up and just kind of, maybe you could go over some of the comments or any other questions. If anyone in the room has anything they'd like to add, your own stuff, or just any final questions for either our panelists or what's on the chat?
So we had one question that was sort of addressed, but just so that everyone sees it, is like, what are resources that folks have if you want to point your student in a direction to get technology help or to get access to that? Just And we had a little bit of a response to that. I just wanted to talk about it with the group so that everyone's on the same page for like hotspots and things.
Mary, what about you? Can you help us with that? Where do we point them when they come with, sometimes I don't know where to go get technology help at the University of Texas. There's like 8 different websites and phone numbers in University and Moody, and where do we point them when they either don't have the technology or don't know where to go?
Yeah, there are 2 places that you could potentially point students, and I'll get these URLs and put them into the chat. One is the university has a student emergency fund, and students can apply for money and resources. And there's also a Moody emergency fund. Yaki, do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so, students can apply for the Moody Emergency Fund only after they've applied to the university's Student Emergency Fund. One, because we don't have an unlimited amount of resources, and I know they don't either, but they have more than we do. And also, we use them as a way to make sure that students actually are eligible for funding. Because one of the barriers that I have found is that I just give the students the money. Well, financial aid doesn't see it that way, and neither does the university. And so there's all these different checks that they have to go through before we can actually even give them anything. And so Student Emergency Services helps us so that we don't necessarily have to do that work, because if they are eligible for the university Student Emergency Fund, then they're more than likely eligible for ours. Right now, for summer, we've gone down to only giving students $300, but we will go back up to $500 come the fall. And we're actively raising more money because I know sometimes that $500 isn't even enough. And so we're actively raising funds, and hopefully if we can raise enough funds, we may be able to raise our cap a little bit so that we can help more students. But again, if you go to the Moody diversity site that just launched last week, the students can literally click on a link there, and it will take them to our application, and they can apply there.
Great. I noticed one in here, Anne, from you about a COVID positive student and stuff. And so maybe I was just curious, we just talked about help financially. What are the options if indeed someone encounters that situation?
I think it's a real issue. I mean, particularly right now, even if people have internet access, they could easily end up, a student could easily end up without internet access because they're locked in their room trying to protect other members of the household. I mean, this is just, I know it's very awkward, but I think it's really going to be part of our reality. And I'm just not sure that we're really responding well enough. The other thing I was just typing in is, on campus, I mean, I'm just very concerned with the equity issues because I've seen it now first session in the summer as well as the spring. And what worries me is on campus, they have these licenses, right? Those licenses are sitting in those labs for software with nobody using them. Why is it not possible to transfer those licenses out to students?
It's not. I just spent, this is Kathleen.
Yeah.
And that's a great question. I spent an hour on the phone with Campus Computer and all those guys. And I was trying to figure out a better deal for our students for Adobe. And the way it is now, and that's why I put that in there, it's going to cost our students $200 a year to get Adobe. Unless we can get some money and we could try to slightly reduce it. But my thing is we almost need to tell the students now that they've got to bank on that. And maybe we need to adjust any textbooks we have or whatever. And I'm just going to talk to journalism professors about which classes do need Adobe. But yeah, the licenses don't transfer. It's $40,000 to have all the Adobe licenses in our computer labs for all of Moody. And I was wondering, could you just switch that 40,000 to something more student-based? Because the thing is, the students won't be able to use those computers as much And they're not going to be able to just check out cameras ad hoc now. There's going to be a very elaborate system. So I know this might not have been the form, but I just wanted to warn you all that we've got to figure out something. We got to get word to our students to sort of figure out how to save for it and get them prepared that it's not going to be the way it was in the before times.
Is there no way, and this is a real question, is there no way to put that extra $100 onto their so they don't feel it right now, like it just rolls into their tuition payment through financial aid, so that financial aid takes care of it now? It's $200. We don't want to add that to our loan, but again, we won't feel it right now. We won't feel it until we start paying the loan back. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out. All those ways. Is there a way that we could register them in our department? Is there a way we can, like, how can we offset it so it doesn't come out of their pockets? I'm still exploring that, and I didn't mean to hijack that, but Anne brought up that really good question. But that's something that in the communication field we've really got to think about, is how are we going to get, because there used to be like tuition fees that they had.
Yeah.
That they used to put in, but they eliminated that to go to a different system. So.
Yeah, and all of these things play out in inequitable ways. There's some students who, when they come up against this, they have the resources and the way to navigate it very fast. And there's some that the same thing can be just a screaming meteor for. And so I think it's great, Kathleen and Ann and Jackie. Great questions. I think we're kind of wrapping up now. We're about at the end of the hour. Any final thoughts or any final comments or anything to share? Anybody? Raise your hand. Listen, I just want to thank everybody. Then I think these conversations are always very helpful. It's always very helpful just to hear and see and to feel the community and what other people are doing, and it helps you plug into maybe affirming what you kind of wanted to do, or it helps you say, oh, that really wasn't as good an idea as I thought because Christian had a better idea. And so you can always do those things. So I want to thank our two panelists and thank all of you guys for coming today. And we'll put this online. We'll video it. So if anyone wants to pass it or recommend it to a friend or something, we'll have that up too. So Mary, thank you for all your organizing. Any final thoughts?
Can I just say one thing?
Thanks, everyone.
Go.
I just want to sort of go back to what Maddie said. I think it's important for us as faculty members to take care of ourselves because I know this is a lot of heavy lifting. Because almost going back to Ann's point, at some point, and I don't know if this is true, I think we may have to find ourselves pivoting completely online, right? We don't know this yet. It requires us
do that.
faculty.
This is being recorded.
I did it already, but what it means is that we're going to find ourselves creating two curriculums, right? And it's going to be very, very difficult, and I know that. And so I think it's important that we sort of balance this out. We create time for ourselves, not only to create the work, but to get away from the work, because I think the time we spend away from the work is going to make us more effective in creating the work for our students, and also make us more effective in engaging with our students, because ultimately this is a time where we're not just teaching, but in some ways we're becoming counselors and we're becoming surrogate parents to these kids. And so I think it's important that we are able to be present for them, that we're there for them, that we deal with our own frustrations and issues, because those will come up, so that we don't then bring that into the classroom when we're teaching the students. So just take care of yourselves. And I know how difficult this is. We all are feeling it right now, but yeah, just take some time for yourself. That way you don't burn out.
Thank you. All right, it's 2:29. That'll wrap her up today. Thank everybody for a great hour. I really appreciate all of the smart conversation. Y'all take care of yourselves and have a great end of the week and stay cool. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
We done?